Mm-mm. My daughter-in-law looked me in the eye and said, "Until you're ready to respect how we run this household, you're not welcome at the dinner table." She said it the way people say things they've been rehearsing. Calm. Final. Like she'd already decided what my answer would be. I looked at my son. He was standing by the refrigerator, arms crossed, staring at the floor the way he used to when he was 9 and had broken something he didn't want to confess to. He said nothing. I had driven 40 minutes to bring them soup. Homemade. The kind with the wide egg noodles my son always asked for when he was sick, even when he wasn't sick, just tired. I'd made a double batch. Put it in the good container, the one with the locking lid so it wouldn't spill. I had even remembered to bring the crusty bread he liked from the bakery on Millbrook, the one that's too expensive and worth every penny. I set the bag down on their porch. I didn't argue. I didn't ask what I'd done. I already knew what I'd done. I had called their daughter, my granddaughter, Lily, directly to wish her a happy birthday instead of going through her mother first. That was the crime. I had bypassed the approved channel. I had contacted a 14-year-old child whose grandmother I happened to be, without permission. I picked up the bag. I walked back to my car. I sat behind the wheel for a long moment, looking at the house through the windshield. The curtains in the front room were new. Blue-gray linen, very tasteful. I hadn't been told about the curtains. I drove home, and somewhere on the interstate, with the soup container on the passenger seat and the bread going cold in the bag, something in me got very quiet and very certain at the same time. I had one phone call to make when I got home, not to my son, not to explain myself. I called my attorney. My name is Patricia. I am 68 years old, and I have lived in the same house in Cedarwood, Ohio for 31 years. My husband Gerald built the back porch with his own hands the summer our son turned 3. We painted it twice, argued about the color both times, and ended up with the same shade of cream we'd started with. Gerald thought that was the funniest thing. He died 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, fast and merciless. He was here and then he wasn't. And everything after that had a different quality to it, like sound through water. My son's name is Daniel. He was a thoughtful child, curious, the kind of boy who collected things. Rocks, baseball cards, questions he wasn't sure how to ask. I raised him to be kind. I believed for a long time that I had succeeded. His wife's name is Renee. She came into our lives 8 years ago with a smile that never quite reached her eyes and opinions she delivered like weather forecasts, matter-of-fact, inevitable, not open to negotiation. At first I told myself I was being unfair, that I was the mother-in-law with the grudge, that she was simply organized, not controlling, efficient, not cold. I told myself that for about 4 years. The first thing she rearranged was the holiday schedule. Gerald had always hosted Thanksgiving. It was his holiday in the way that Christmas was mine. He made the turkey, argued with the stuffing, stayed up too late watching football and pretending he wasn't asleep. The November after we lost him, before I had even figured out how to sleep through a whole night again, Renee announced they'd be hosting going forward. "It's just more practical," she said. "You shouldn't have to do all that work." I hadn't said I didn't want to do the work. I wanted to do the work. The work was the point, but I said, of course, whatever's easiest. That was the first small piece of myself I handed over without realizing I was doing it. Then came the others, one by one, quiet as pulled threads. She started calling me Patricia instead of Pat. No explanation, no conversation. One day I was Pat. The next I was Patricia. And when I gently mentioned that everyone called me Pat, she smiled and said, "Patricia just feels more respectful to me." There was no good answer to that. She stopped relaying messages. Lily would leave me a drawing, a note, a request for a sleepover, and I wouldn't hear about it until a week had passed. When I asked, Renee would say she'd been meaning to call, that things had been hectic. I learned to stop leaving messages through her and started texting Daniel directly. Then Daniel stopped answering texts promptly. Then Lily got her own phone and I would sneak little birthday texts to her, just the two of us, the way grandchildren and grandmothers have always conspired. That, apparently, was not allowed. Gerald's toolbox was still in the garage, a big red metal thing, dented on one side from a fall he never bothered to fix. When Daniel and Renee bought their house on Sycamore, he offered to help them fix up the basement. He drove over on a Saturday with that toolbox in the truck and spent 2 weekends doing the work properly. After he died, I kept the toolbox in my garage. I never used it, but I couldn't get rid of it. It smelled like him. Oil and metal and something else I could never name. The winter after Gerald passed, Daniel came by one afternoon and asked if he could borrow some tools for a project. I said of course. He took 3 things out of the toolbox and left. He never brought them back. The next time he came, he took 2 more things, and then a drill, and then the level Gerald had bought special because he trusted it when he couldn't trust anything else. I never said anything. He was grieving too. I told myself that was what families did. They divided up the things and no one asked, and the things go where they're needed. But the toolbox kept getting lighter. Lily was the reason I kept showing up. She has Gerald's eyes, that specific dark brown that looks almost black in low light. And she has a way of sitting next to you that makes you feel like you're exactly where you're supposed to be. When she was little, she called me Grandma Patchy because she couldn't say Patricia and Pat was apparently too short. I've been Grandma Patchy for 14 years, and I am not ready to stop being her. She started asking me things. Why do the leaves change? How did Grandpa Gerald fix things when they broke? What was her dad like when he was small? She wanted to know the shape of the family she came from. That felt important. I tried to be honest with her without making her parents smaller in her eyes. I don't know if I succeeded, but I tried. The dinner table incident happened in March. I had not been invited to Sunday dinner in 6 weeks. I found this out by accident. Lily mentioned in a text that Grandma Carol, Renee's mother, had been over for pot roast 2 Sundays in a row. I didn't mention that I hadn't been called. I just filed it away with all the other things I was filing. Then Daniel called to say they were having a small birthday dinner for Lily at the house. Would I like to come? I said yes before he finished the sentence. I brought a gift I'd thought about for months. A small camera, a real one, not a phone, because Lily had told me she wanted to take pictures of things that mattered. I wrapped it in brown paper the way she liked. I practiced a card 3 times before I got the wording right. When I arrived, Renee's parents were already there, her sister and brother-in-law, a couple I didn't recognize. The table was set for 12. My place was at the end, beside the window, the seat with the draft. That was fine. I sat. After dinner, after the cake, after Lily opened her presents at the kitchen table while everyone watched, Renee's mother made a comment about the camera. She said she hoped Lily would learn to use it properly instead of just pointing it at everything. She said it with a laugh that was meant to include me and didn't quite. I said something. I said that learning came from pointing at things until you understood why they mattered. I said it quietly. I thought I said it quietly. I thought I said it kindly. Daniel looked at the ceiling. Renee said she thought we should let Lily decide how she wanted to learn. And then a week later, when I called Lily to follow up about the camera, Renee sent me a text within the hour. It said I had undermined her at the party. It said I had made a comment that embarrassed the family in front of guests. It said that going forward I should consider whether my contributions to family conversations were helpful or divisive. I read it 4 times. Then I put the phone down, went to the kitchen, and made myself a cup of coffee. The real kind, the expensive kind, I only made on hard days. I sat at the table where Gerald and I had eaten 10,000 meals. I looked at the window. Outside, the yard was starting to come back from winter. The first uncertain green at the edges of things. I thought about what I was allowed to do. I thought about what I had been slowly trained not to do. I thought about the soup I had brought to a porch and carried back home without unpacking. I thought about the toolbox getting lighter. I called my attorney that afternoon. Her name is Susan, and she had helped Gerald and me with our wills, our property arrangements, everything. When I explained the situation, she was quiet for a moment. Patricia, she said, tell me about the house. The house Gerald and I bought was not what I had thought it would be. The house I lived in now, the one in Cedarwood, the one with the cream porch and Gerald's garage, was mine. Paid off. My name on the deed. But 2 years after Gerald died, when Daniel was worried about my finances and I was too exhausted to argue, we had added his name to the deed as a secondary holder. Just in case, he said. So I'd have someone to call if the bank called. So things would be simpler if something happened to me. I had trusted that. Gerald was gone and I needed to trust something. Susan pulled up the paperwork while I waited. He's listed as a joint tenant, she said. That's different from a tenant in common. It means if something were to happen to you, the property transfers to him automatically. But right now, while you're living, you hold the primary right of occupancy. You can sell. You'd need his signature. But you have grounds to petition if he refuses without cause. I asked her what it would take. She told me. I wrote it down. Every step. That evening, I walked through the house, not to decide yet, just to see it clearly. The scratch on the hallway baseboard where Daniel had crashed his bike indoors in 1994, 7 years old and completely unrepentant. The kitchen tile Gerald had replaced himself, slightly crooked, the kind of crooked that was a fingerprint. The window above the sink where I had stood for 30 years watching the backyard change with the seasons. The hook on the back door where Gerald hung his keys every single night without fail and where I still sometimes looked before remembering. I had loved this house the way you love something you built. Not just chosen, but made. And they were already treating it like something they were waiting to inherit. I called a realtor named Tom the next morning. He came by on Thursday in a good coat and sensible shoes and walked through the rooms without theatrics. He had the manner of someone who had seen what houses meant to people and had learned to be careful with that. Good bones, he said. The market's favorable. You'd get strong offers. I asked him to keep it quiet for now. No signs, no listing until I said so. He said he had buyers who search without listings, serious ones, the kind who didn't need to be convinced. I told him to get started. Daniel didn't know. I needed it to stay that way until the paperwork was further along. Susan had explained my position. Technically, he could contest, delay, make things uncomfortable, but he couldn't stop me. The house was mine to sell, and my right to do so was written clearly in a document he had signed. He had signed it. He just hadn't read it carefully. That was the difference between us. I started packing slowly. I told myself it was early, that nothing was decided, but my hands didn't believe me. I wrapped the good china in dish towels and put it in a box. I found Gerald's field jacket in the back of the closet and held it for a long time before folding it carefully and setting it aside. Some things would go with me, some things would go to storage, some things would go to storage, some things would go to people who would use them. Lily texted on a Thursday evening. She said her mom had mentioned I might be moving. She asked if it was true. She said her dad seemed upset. I typed back that I was thinking through some things, that I would explain when I could, that she shouldn't worry about me. I was fine. She sent back, I know you're fine. I'm asking because I'll miss you. I sat with that for a while. I called her back instead of texting. We talked for an hour. She told me about a photograph she had taken with the camera. A single oak tree in the park behind her school, shot from underneath. Looking up through the branches, she said she took it at the end of the day when the light was going gold. She said she didn't know why it worked, it just did. I told her that was exactly right. That sometimes things work and you don't fully understand why until much later. That understanding comes after, not before. She said, "Is that also true for people?" I said, "Especially for people." She didn't ask about the house again. But before she hung up, she said, "Grandma Patchy, whatever you're doing, I think you're doing it right." I didn't tell her what that meant to me. Some things you hold. The offer came on a Tuesday. Tom called at 10:30, and I could hear in his voice that it was a good one. A couple in their late 50s, he said. She was a retired school librarian. He had recently taken early retirement from a firm in Cincinnati, and they were looking to be closer to their grandchildren and Dayton. They had driven past the house twice before the listing went quiet. They had asked Tom directly if there was any chance it might be available. When they walked through, the woman, her name was Helen, had stopped in the kitchen and looked at the window above the sink for a long moment. "My mother had a window just like this," she said. Tom told me her eyes had filled. She hadn't apologized for it. Full price, conventional loan, solid pre-approval. They wanted to close in 6 weeks. I sat at the kitchen table with the offer in front of me and looked at it for a long time. 6 weeks. Everything I had built here. Everything that still smelled like Gerald's coffee and the lavender I planted every spring along the south wall. 6 weeks. And it would belong to someone else. But it would belong to someone who stopped at a kitchen window and thought of their mother. That was enough for me. I signed. Daniel found out on a Friday morning. I don't know exactly how. Tom had been discreet, but paperwork travels. He called twice before 9. I let both calls go. The third time, he left a message. His voice was tight in the way it gets when he is trying to sound reasonable and is not succeeding. He said I should have talked to him. He said this was a family decision. He said he understood I was upset about recent events, but that selling the house was not a proportionate response. He said, and here his voice shifted into something younger, something I recognized from a long time ago. He said he had assumed he would always have this house. I listened to the voicemail twice. Then I called Susan and asked her to be available that afternoon. Renee sent a message at noon. It was measured and carefully worded, the way her messages always were, like depositions. She said they were concerned about my decision-making. She said that a move of this magnitude warranted a conversation with the full family. She said they only wanted what was best for me. I did not respond. What I did was drive to the nursery on Route 9 and buy 3 flats of impatiens for the front border. If Helen wanted color when she arrived in spring, I wanted there to be color. I planted them myself, on my knees in the dirt. The good kind of tired that comes from doing something real. Daniel came by that evening. He rang the doorbell instead of using his key, which told me he understood something had changed even if he didn't fully know what. I let him in. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at the boxes. He asked if I had lost my mind. He said it quietly, almost carefully, like he was genuinely asking. I told him I had found it. He looked at me for a long time without saying anything. Then he said, "Did we do something wrong?" I thought about how to answer that. I thought about the toolbox. The soup I carried back to my car. The holiday table where Grandma Carol had been invited for 2 consecutive Sunday dinners, and I had not been called. I thought about a woman who stood at a window and wept because it reminded her of her mother. I thought about all the times I had made myself smaller and called it generosity. "You did small things," I said. "Over a long time. And I let you." He didn't speak. "I'm not selling the house to punish you, Daniel. I'm selling it because I'm done waiting to feel welcome in a life that's already mine." He left without saying much more. I watched his car back out of the driveway and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not victory. Not even relief. Something quieter. Permission, I think. The kind you give yourself. I moved into an apartment on the 2nd floor of a building 12 minutes from Lily's school. 2 bedrooms, a small balcony that faced east, good morning light. I brought the things that were mine before anyone else had an opinion about them. Gerald's coffee mug, the quilt his mother made, the photograph of the 2 of us on the porch the summer we bought the house, his arm around me, both of us squinting into the sun like we couldn't believe our luck. I hung the photograph in the new kitchen. The first morning, I stood at the window with a cup of coffee and watched the sun come up over the rooftops. It was a different view than I'd had for 30 years. Smaller, in some ways, more immediate. The sounds were different. Traffic instead of crickets, voices instead of wind. I didn't feel sad. I felt awake. Lily came the following Saturday with a bag of groceries she had paid for herself, with babysitting money, and she cooked me scrambled eggs at my new stove while I sat at the counter and watched. She burned the edges slightly and told me it was European style. I told her that was exactly right. After we ate, she set up the camera on a little tripod she had borrowed from a friend and took photographs of the apartment. Each room, the balcony, the kitchen window with the morning light still lingering. She said she wanted to document the beginning of things. I asked her what she meant. She said, "You're starting something new, Grandma Patchy. That deserves pictures." The trust had been Susan's suggestion, though I had been thinking about something similar on my own. A separate account, protected, structured to grow. I put the proceeds in carefully, with instructions she helped me draft over 2 long phone calls and 1 in-person meeting where she brought good coffee and didn't rush me. Lily's name was on it. She could access it at 25. There were no conditions attached to the money beyond one, and I wrote it myself in plain language, so there would be no confusion. This is yours to use as you need it. You do not owe anyone an explanation for how you spend it. You do not need permission. I didn't tell Daniel about the trust directly. I knew he would find out eventually. When he did, he called and said he needed to understand what I was thinking. I told him I was thinking about a 14-year-old girl who deserved a head start that didn't come with strings. He said that he was Lily's father and this affected him. I said that I was Lily's grandmother and it also affected me. He didn't have a response to that. Renee sent no message at all. I thought that was probably the most honest thing she had done in 8 years. Some mornings I drove past the old house. Not often, not intentionally, but the route between the apartment and the grocery store I liked passed within 2 blocks, and occasionally I turned down the familiar street before I caught myself. The impatiens were coming in nicely. Helen had added a wreath to the front door. Simple dried flowers, the kind you make yourself or buy from someone who does. The curtains in the front room were different, white instead of blue, and from the outside it looked like someone was taking care of the place with the easy attention of people who are happy to be somewhere. I always felt something when I passed it. Not grief, exactly, more like the particular feeling of recognizing a place that used to hold your name. You can love something completely and still understand that it was time. Gerald used to say that a house was just the frame, that what you put inside it was the real thing. I had taken the real things with me. Lily called on a Sunday morning in May, early, before 9, which meant something had happened. She said her parents had sat her down the night before. They explained the trust. They explained a sale. They used words like undermined and circumvented. They asked her how she felt. She told them she felt grateful. There was a silence. She said her mother had gone quiet in that way she had. The kind of quiet that was a different kind of statement. Her father had looked at the ceiling. Then she told them, "Grandma Patchy isn't punishing you. She's just done waiting to be invited." I asked her how they responded. She said, "Dad started crying. Not a lot, but a little. I think it surprised him." I didn't say anything for a moment. I thought about Daniel at 9 years old, collecting rocks, asking questions he wasn't sure how to ask. I thought about the boy who built a fort in the backyard and made me be the lookout for an hour without telling me what we were looking out for. I thought about how much time passes and how quietly. "Does he want to talk?" I asked. "He doesn't know how to start," Lily said. "Tell him I'll pick up," I said. He called that evening. He didn't apologize cleanly. Daniel had never been good at clean apologies. That was something I passed on to him without meaning to. He circled it. He said he should have paid more attention. He said Renee and he had talked. He said he didn't want Lily to grow up watching her grandmother disappear. It wasn't everything, but it was something true. "I'm not disappearing," I told him. "I'm right here. I just moved." I wrote Lily a letter the week before school got out for summer. Not a text, Not an email, an actual letter on stationery I bought at the paper store downtown. I addressed the envelope in my best handwriting, the careful kind, not the quick kind. I told her what I wanted her to know. I told her that the women in our family had a habit of making themselves small in rooms where people expected them to be decoration. That I had done it. That her grandmother before me had done it. That it was not a character flaw, it was a learned behavior, and like everything learned, it could be unlearned. I told her the camera was for exactly this. To look at things directly. To decide what was worth keeping in the frame and what wasn't. To understand that the photographer chooses what gets remembered. I told her the trust would be there when she needed it, not to spend all at once, not to save forever, but to use when she reached a door that should have been open and found it locked. I told her I was proud of her, not for being easy or quiet or agreeable, for being awake, for knowing what she saw. I sealed the envelope and set it by the door to mail in the morning. Then I went to the balcony with my coffee, the early kind, the expensive kind, and I sat in the light that was just beginning to come over the buildings to the east. The city was still mostly quiet. A few birds. A car on the block below. The ordinary sounds of a day deciding to begin. I had sold the house that my hands helped build. I had moved out of the life that others had been slowly editing without my permission. I had put my granddaughter's name on something that no one could negotiate away. None of it had been loud. None of it had required screaming or ultimatums or the kind of dramatic confrontation people make movies about. It had just required, finally, after a very long time, being as certain about myself as I had always been about the people I loved. Gerald would have laughed. He would have said I took the long way. He would have said I always took the long way and always got there. He wasn't wrong. The light kept coming. I let it. I didn't set out to teach anyone a lesson. That's not what this was. I set out to stop erasing myself, and it turned out those two things looked identical from the outside. For a long time, I believed that staying quiet was the same as keeping peace. That swallowing the small things. The soup I brought home untouched. The holiday table I was no longer called to. The toolbox getting lighter one, borrowed tool at a time, was the cost of being loved. That if I just made myself small enough, patient enough, agreeable enough, the people I had spent my life building up would eventually turn around and see me standing there. They didn't turn around. They just kept walking. What I understand now, sitting in this apartment with the morning light coming through a window that is entirely mine, is that what happened to me didn't happen all at once. It happened in the way that most important things happen, slowly, in pieces, each one so small you tell yourself it doesn't count. Renee didn't wake up one day and decide to erase me. Daniel didn't make a single choice to stop seeing me. It was 100 small choices, each one easier than the last, each one made possible by the one before it. And my silence made every single one of them easier. That's the part I had to sit with, not their behavior, mine. Every time I said, of course, when I meant that hurts, I handed them permission to go further. Every time I absorbed a slight and called it grace, I taught them that I had no edges, and people without edges are very easy to move around. The house was never really about the house. It was about whether I was willing to be the last person to respect myself. When I called Susan that afternoon, when I sat across from Tom and said, I'd like to start the process, when I signed those papers and didn't waver, none of it felt like revenge. It felt like revenge. It felt like remembering, like finding a version of myself I had packed away so carefully that I almost forgot where I put her. She was there the whole time, under all the accommodating and the excusing and the careful not making a fuss. Still certain, still whole, what Lily said to her parents, that I wasn't punishing them, I was just done waiting to be invited. That's the thing I want to hold on to. Because she understood something at 14 that took me decades to name. Dignity isn't something other people give you when they're ready. It's something you claim when you finally decide you're worth claiming it for. Daniel cried a little when she said it. I think he surprised himself. And I think that surprise was the beginning of something, not a resolution, not a clean slate, but an opening, the kind that only happens when someone stops pretending nothing is wrong. I wrote Lily a letter about the women in our family who had made themselves small and called it love. I meant it as a warning and a permission slip at the same time. Here is what we've done. Here is what you don't have to do. Here is money with no strings, because the strings are what get you in the end. What I want her to know. What I want anyone to know who has been sitting at the table with the draft at the end of the party in the seat by the window, quietly absorbing, is that the moment you decide to stop shrinking is not a dramatic moment. It doesn't come with music. It comes quietly, like the morning. Like light that starts so gradually you almost miss it. And then suddenly the whole room is different, and you realize it's been changing for a while. You were just too busy apologizing for existing to notice. I didn't sell the house to win. I sold it to stop losing. There is a difference. I know that now.